I am on a Shure KSM 32. Malcolm is on a Lewitt Ray Aura. So here we go.
All right, everybody, we are back. This is Creativity is the Cure. I am your host, Malcolm Moore, and today I have one of my favorite people on the planet, writer, comedian, puppeteer, photographer, and bread maker, Tom Caltabiano. How are you today, Tom?
Hello, Malcolm. I didn't know where you were going. I thought when you said one of my favorite people, I'm like, oh, there's another guest coming besides me. That's nice.
And where are we broadcasting from today? Where are we in Studio City?
We are technically in Los Angeles is the zip code. And so for people that don't know, there's a lot of it's funny because when I worked, sorry, I don't mean to jump into this, but in the Los Angeles area, as a guy from New Jersey, I could care less about where I lived per se. And people are like, well, don't live here because it's not as cool as here or here. You know, there's all this geographical status.
Yeah.
So that's why I say technically my zip code is Los Angeles, but we're really in studio. We're looking at Studio City.
Looking right out the window.
Yeah, we're looking at Studio City, et cetera. So, so there. But we have a beautiful vista. And maybe the worst thing for audio, which is glass hard structures within
and
inches.
a few glass bottles up there on the wall.
Yeah. We're in my home studio is where we are. And Malcolm is referring to from one of the things I shot, which was a bad dating show.
Oh.
Yeah, and so I designed this. I'm very hands-on. So
that's what this was for.
Yeah,
I thought these came from the Dan Aykroyd commercial, but that's different.
Well, no, the Dan Aykroyd thing was for when I was hosting Tales of the Cocktail Award. Yeah, we can get into that.
Okay,
we've already lost your whole audience, Malcolm. But yeah, no, we were doing so. These racks, what I'm pointing at everybody is racks with booze, and those racks would come down and go in front of my stove, and it would convert my kitchen into a bar.
Whoa!
And so it looked like a bar. And then the Dan Aykroyd thing was we did a short film to open the award show called there's a big convention called Tales of the Cocktail. Yes, so we did a short film that we wrote and shot and showed in front of 3,000 of the world's greatest bartenders.
Good God, no pressure.
And Dan Aykroyd wanted to be in the film.
Yeah.
And so we said, oh, well, good luck getting in our film. No, we said, yes, we'll write the entire 10-minute film or whatever it ended up being around you. And he has something called Crystal Head Vodka.
That is right.
Yeah.
Okay.
When I worked on Loves Raymond, I became friends with something known as the key grip. The key grip is the guy that puts up everything that holds up lights, cameras, rigging, all this stuff is the grip. Okay. Right. I was doing a DVD extra for something and he said, Tom, I had to film with Ray. And he goes, Tom, why don't you put a lighting grid in your house? And I said, well, that sounds crazy because I have a normal house. He goes, no, but if you shoot in a movie, you put up a temporary lighting grid and then you can hang everything from your ceiling. So I said, well, this seems excessive. And he was right. And I did it in 2007 and I've never looked back. The amount of stuff, because we filmed your content here. So you see, it's just complete. Once you do that, everybody who's listening, put a lighting grid in your house.
Well, this house or this room is kind of like the Ray Bradbury, the Velt, because I've seen you morph it into so many things.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've been here for like a party where it looks beautiful there, or we're shooting a TV show.
Now it's just a messy house. We've morphed it into a messy house. Oh yeah, we've emptied it out. The Iron Chef people filmed. And it should as a photographer, it's because of the windows. It's great for light, and even filming your stuff. Right, it looks beautiful. Yeah. Because you have all this natural light. There's nothing better than natural light. So.
Who's your friend, Simon, that's in the alcohol business? You did something with him here too, right?
Simon Ford created something called Ford's Gin, which he sold to the Brown-Forman Company, which owns Jack Daniels. So
wow.
By the way, this has got to be...
Nice guy, too.
Here's what my friend says sometimes. She calls me Dangerous Tangents. That should be the name of your book, Tom, because the amount of different stories. Yeah, Simon Ford, if you guys look, Ford's Gin, he designed the bottle, and he was working for the second biggest liquor company in the world called Pernod Ricard. Wow. And I met him as a photographer in London during the release of Beefeater 24. And he was a great guy to know because he had an expense account, right? Yeah. And when I met him, I said, oh, he's a charming British guy. I could do a dating show with him where he's the bartender and I talk to girls about their bad dates. Now, this is 2009, before now short form content and Wi-Fi, and you're watching, you're glued to your phone now. But back then you weren't. But we shot it. It was great. We pitched it to YouTube, and it could, I still have them. Like, people loved them when women saw them, because women cared about what happened on bad dates, and so
course.
it was really great. It was great. It was a great thing to have. But Simon, in the meantime, says, Tom, I'm quitting Diageo, where I have a big expense account, and I'm starting my own company. So rather than treating you to dinner, can I sleep on your couch? And so I was like, well, this seems like a very bad idea. And sure enough, 7 years later, and a lot of work, he sold it to Jack Daniels.
Yeah, and a guitar player too, right?
He does play guitar. Yeah, he wanted to be in the business of rock and roll. He grew up in the UK, but there's pictures of him with crazy long hair, and he wanted to be a guitar player.
I gotta see that.
Yeah. Anyway, now he has short hair, and he travels the world pushing gin, a delicious gin. Malcolm, why are we here? I forget already. What is?
All right, so the podcast is called Creativity is the Cure, and I know you to be an extremely creative person in the typical sense where, you're a writer, photographer, you're a puppeteer. However, we like to focus on the part of your brain that lets you be creative. And I want to go back in time, and I want you to think about the first time you realized that you could be creative. So that could be, when was the first time that you thought of an idea and executed it and brought it from your brain into the real world, and you were like, wow, where did that come from?
Interesting. It's funny because I just saw a friend of mine that I went to high school with. He's an old friend. He was like the first guy that I wrote something funny with, and we had to do a film. I went to a northern New Jersey rural high school, no arts program, no like, oh, my father was a film guy, like zero anything in that way. But we had to make a short film for some class that I remember. And I remember we did a thing where we played the Hawaii Five-0 theme, and we were driving up the road with in a Volkswagen Bug, and we just had paddles out the window, and we were paddling out the window, and it just was fun. It was genuinely funny. So that was like the first thing of doing.
But you're just intuitively doing that for fun, right?
Well, we'd make each other laugh. And what's funny is my mother had, when I was 2 or 3 years old, had a Humpty Dumpty made. Her friend made a Humpty Dumpty, okay? A little stuffed doll. And I would play with this thing to the point where it fell apart from me playing with it so much.
What age is this?
3, 4, 5, yeah. Somewhere in there, 4 or 5. I know I have a picture of me going to the Statue of Liberty at like age 7, and I'm on a boat, and it's me with my Humpty Dumpty next to me.
That I got to see.
Yeah, I got to find that photo. Yeah, but I always played with stuffed animals, and every kid plays with stuffed animals. Of course. They call them stuffies now. Can I tell you something, Malcolm?
Yes.
You told me that. No, I'm being serious. So I told 2 of the people that we're working with this Friday. Yeah. I said, the stuffies, they did it. And they're like, what's a stuffy? And I go, that's what they call them now. They're like, never heard that in our lives. So I thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
By the way, I just got done talking straight for an hour and 10 minutes on my own.
Oh, I know. From one podcast to another.
Yeah, from my own.
Tell everybody really quick.
Every Sunday, and it's called Loves Raymond 360 because I was a writer on the show, but I also took pictures. Yeah. And so it's the most photographed show in the history of television. And I never am without my camera. And so
wait, how many photos do you think that you have from 9 years?
9 years. Yeah. Oh, I know, because we did a book. Simon & Schuster published a book called Loves Raymond, Our Family Album. But it's about 30,000 photos, all film negatives. And so I started sharing them during COVID. Right. I was like, okay, let me put it up on Instagram. And usually what would happen is I would say, Malcolm, would you like to see 30,000 pictures of Loves Raymond? And you would go, I'm so busy, Tom. I really would love to, but I can't. So now I found the upside of social media, just like if you're into music and you're like, I have an obscure bootleg of a Rochester bar where somebody played this. And so now I have this audience which loves the show, and all of a sudden it's this gold mine of photos that for people they're fascinated by. Just like,
and it's been going for 4
since
years?
COVID. Yeah, since the beginning of COVID.
I mean, I just watched the end of this episode, and people are like, well, "What about this episode?" And then you're like, "Hang on," and then you hold your phone up.
Well, here, can I tell you the phenomenon? I mean, we can go back, but the phenomenon, I think, because I just had dinner with Phil Rosenthal and Ray and the writers. At this point in history, there are no more shows coming up that are doing 200 episodes. Okay, there's phenomenal. It's the best time in the world for TV, but nobody's doing a clean sitcom that lasts 200 episodes. So the social media presence of I Love Lucy is gigantic. Like you can't, but I'm like, this is a show from 1957 and people are like, hey, that one painting on the side of this thing, you know what I mean? Like as if it's yesterday.
Well, people have time now to, I mean, when we grew up, right, there was 3 or 4 channels and then we had a 5th, but now there's just segmented audience of
Everything.
people in
Oh,
bubbles
yeah. Well, that's the beauty and the downside. The downside is nobody has a giant share of the crowd.
Right.
The upside is people can, find out the button collectors of the world can find each other.
When did you get into doing stand-up comedy and or writing? Which came first and how old were you?
I think when I was like 13 or 14, I heard George Carlin's Class Clown album. My sister had it. My sister's 2 years older than me.
For the younger listeners, the vinyl comedy albums were a big thing when we were growing up, right?
100%. So it's hard for people to, it's funny because, Malcolm, if we were having this discussion in 1950, 60, 70, 80, 90, or 2000, nothing changed in that time.
Right.
It's records, TV, radio, right? There's no, you'd be going, oh, you see, and now
maybe
it's
an
like,
8-track,
yeah, maybe, well, yes, throw in a couple different formats. And in the past 10 years, it's just like, well, look, you're just a guy who's interviewing people and people from around the world can hear you. And in 1950, that would have been like a worldwide broadcast. How is that even possible? How do we do that? We take all the greatest minds in the world and you're like, hey, you know what? I'm still in my underwear, but I'll do this interview and people around the world will hear it. You know what I mean? It's just an amazing
and over in Europe,
thing.
BBC, I mean, there's only a couple channels, right?
Yeah. And so with back then, we're saying comedy albums, and now you see snippets on YouTube or whatever. But at that point, you would get a comedy album, and George Carlin, I just sparked to Class Clown, George Carlin, Class Clown, and I knew where I really excelled was in conversation, getting laughs from friends and like.
Okay,
friends'
so the comedy
parents.
came before the writing.
Yes. And what's interesting is, I don't know where we are in this. We're at the beginning, but I wrote on Loves Raymond for 9 years, and I've written now like Lego and I've written
In your own show, Hello Hi.
Yeah,
How Are You?
I have a show, Hello Hi How Are You? Yeah, that I wrote with Zach Foster and Nee Kirschman. But it's what we were trying to do is sophisticated humor for kids and parents, but. Really making people laugh in live conversation. I loved doing that. So that was what I did in high school. And then I went to NYU for finance and management. And I listened on the radio once. They were interviewing comedians talking about how you go to an open mic night or something like that.
Right.
And by the way, I would say this, especially when you're younger, you put so much pressure on yourself, especially you're going to graduate from college in a year. You better figure out the rest of your life. And it's like, you have so much time. You have so much time to be, I look at like Ken Jeong, who was a doctor.
Right.
And next thing you know, he's driving, jumping naked out of the back of a car.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like that, it doesn't, and just for a framework, I was thinking today, the Beatles were only produced albums from 63 to 70.
Right.
Okay. We're in 2025.
Yeah.
That means if they broke up today, that means they only started making albums in 2018. That's how short ago, you know what I mean? So
and when people watch Get Back, they go, "Oh my God, they're like what, 27 in there?"
Oh yeah, and they're calling it quits. Yeah. But it's just such a short time. So life is very long, if you have patience. So for me, I went to NYU. I studied finance and management. I went to a junior college in New Jersey because I grew up without a lot of money and didn't do great in high school. Went to a junior college called County College of Morris and then transferred to NYU. But I was like, okay, business you can use and everything. That's what I'll do. But while I was there,
that's great.
I heard a guy on the radio, these comedians talking about doing comedy. And I'm like, I have to at least try it.
Anybody I would have heard of?
I don't even remember it was like on, 870 AM radio late at night, and I'm listening to these guys on a little AM radio, during, and I'm just remember them. And I thought, what is an open mic night? Because now, by the way, Malcolm, comedy is so common that, back then it would, now it's like, you want to be an accountant? Why don't you do something more predictable, like comedian? Become a comedian. That's more respectable. And
can I pause for a second and ask you, when you heard George Carlin and you're like, this is something I could do, did you do what typical artists do, like a painter might, copy a Picasso and learn from the masters? Did you memorize
all of his material?
Well, did you memorize his jokes and then start to make your own, or were you making your own right away?
No, I wasn't. I don't even know that I was like, oh, I could do this. I just responded to it. You know what I mean? I wasn't like, I could. It's not like listening to. It's like I just feels like. it comes very naturally. The getting the laugh. By the way, it sounds so pompous, like because for people listening who are like, I've never even heard of this guy Malcolm, and he thinks he's funny and can make people laugh. But it was that feeling of like, and I knew it, and
But it sounded like from what you said with your buddy in the car, you were already kind of doing that.
Yes. Well, you're thinking of funny. You're responding to that. And at business school, I was like, this is. I know that it's important, like to learn, but I was so bored. You know what I mean by it. And so the responding still to comedy, and then I was like, I have to do it. It was like I must do. I can't. I was still young, but I'm like, I can't not have tried to do stand up.
Of course.
And so I was trying to raise money for this project, which we end up raising money for this project. And what's weird is this is a very interesting thing. If you fail at everything else, it's much easier to go into what you want to do. You know what I mean? Like, in other words, it's a.
What do I have to lose?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's precisely right. I mean, if you're Jeff Beck or Jimmy Page, like you're at 15, you're playing guitar. You know you're playing guitar. You're not like, I'm gonna. And I remember reading that Mike McCready from Pearl Jam, he was going to give it up. Like before Pearl Jam, he was like done and going to have a straight job and whatever. Right. Like, it's like, you know what? It's not working out, because the big overarching thing with a lot of artists is, how do I make a living? Right. That's the biggest challenge. You're like,
because you already have your talent. You know what you're doing.
Maybe, and generally you suck compared to the best. So for George Carlin is the best, let's say, and at the beginning, music is always the better thing. You're like, I want to be the Beatles, and then you pick up a guitar, you're like, man, do I suck? I just heard myself, and you have to allow yourself to stink for a long time. Yeah. You know, before you...
Well, we all know the story of Rodney Dangerfield. Yeah. Here's a guy that didn't make it till he was 50 or so,
Well,
right?
40.
Right?
Yeah, late 30s and 40, yeah.
From what and this is very simple, but I heard that, he had to go back to a normal job, and he would write jokes and put them into a duffel bag, and then when he finally made it, they're like, how do you have so many jokes? And he's like, well, I've been collecting them.
Yeah, I think he was a salesman of siding or some aluminum siding or something like that.
Yeah. How did you get from... Okay, finding out that you want to be a comedian, finding out that you can make people laugh, how did you end up writing those jokes down? And why did you have to do that? For people that don't really know comedy, I think a lot of people that I know watch comedy, they don't realize that the comedians might memorize this stuff, but a lot of them are actually writing the jokes, right? Or they might have people writing for them.
Yeah, that's not as
more
common.
Talk show.
Well, that's not as common now. So here's what I would say. I can tell you my specific story, but for the most part, especially now versus like Borscht Belt time, where you would buy, just a standard joke is a standard joke. Like Henny Youngman, it's like, this is a joke that any comedian can say, versus a very specific of the that Louis,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Louis C.K. is not going to say a joke that's written for Henny Youngman. You know what I mean? Like, it just wouldn't work. And so it's funny because I was at Stand Up New York, and Louis did a joke that was kind of a joke, and he does it, and he goes, I can't believe I just did like a joke, like, because his it's so observational. So the more specific your voice is, and I think this started with Lenny Bruce. So before Lenny Bruce, I think it was more, a joke is a joke. Bob Hope could tell a joke, and another guy could tell the same joke and be like, yeah, that's just a funny joke. Right. Versus the personality is really coming out.
Right.
So for me, I will tell you my story just to get the time frame, which was, I knew I wanted to try and do stand-up, and then I had moved back to try and raise money on this project, which, by the way, it's a crazy story, because I will tell you how we got there, but I'll tell you the punchline now, which is, in one 24-hour period, I did a sketch in a ventriloquire on Conan O'Brien, and the next day I had to present an experimental engine to the largest producer of tank engines in the world. Okay.
Wow.
So in 24
hours.
And so all I'm sitting there as I'm presenting this engine to this company, I'm just like, I hope this guy wasn't watching Conan last night, because he would have seen me holding a ventriloquist dummy, and he would be like, I'm questioning your expertise in engines. I'll tell you how I got there. Yeah. It was, how do you want to do stand up? I graduated, I moved out to New Jersey, and I started taking a machine shop class, because I took a welding class and a machine shop class, so I knew how to weld, and I was taking a machine shop class, and there was a little thing on the wall that said acting class from the guy that taught Robin Williams and all this stuff. So I said, okay, I signed up for that acting
Yes.
class to get to do stand-up. I thought, okay, stand-up is a very frightening thing for a normal human being.
Right.
You know, like even we were talking, I was listening to Christian Anderson, you know, like his mother was in theater and his father was in theater.
Right.
Like my father was a service manager, an auto mechanic, basically a service manager for Ford. You know, my mother worked for Hewlett Packard. There was no show business in that. So it was so foreign. So I went to acting class and I studied with this guy named Gene Lesser, who went to Juilliard. And I always thought, I wonder if he really taught Robin Williams and Kevin. And sure enough, I ended up working with Robin Williams years later. And I go, Robin, did you know? And I said, and he instantly broke into this thing that told me he knew Gene Lesser, the teacher. But I took that class and the teacher said, why are you here, Tom? And I said, I really want to be Johnny Carson. That's why I want to do that. And he goes, well, first of all, there's only one Johnny Carson. You know, like that's not a real goal because even to become a professional basketball player, the odds are astronomically low, but at least there's hundreds of them. You know what I mean? Not just one guy. But by the end of the class, we would go to drink afterwards. By the end of the year of studying, he goes, you would make a very good Johnny Carson, Tom, because I was very good at conversation and very good at, here's the missing skill, Malcolm, that I see, is listening. I love listening to people, right? And as a host, you're there every single night. They have a chance to make them, you're there all the time. So let them just listen, get in a couple laughs, but listen, because that's and it's bizarre that now with podcasting, it's so much conversation, which I love, right?
Yes.
It's a great thing. So just to fast forward, I studied at acting, and my girlfriend at the time we were raising money for cancer for this thing called a skiathon, right? 24-hour skiathon. So we go to the skiathon and there's a radio DJ there. And I go, listen, I want to do stand up, but I also want to get into this, talking radio. And so he said, oh, come to my studio on Christmas morning. Right. And I go, yeah, sure. So, I'm 23 at the time or something. So I go meet him, get a job there at this the radio station was a polka radio station in upstate New York called WTBQ.
Where in upstate New York? Because
Florida.
I'm from there.
No, not that. No, you're from almost the North Pole. This is only 40. This is only 30 miles. You're from you're Rochester. This is like 30 miles north of Manhattan. This is Florida, New York. It's called. Yeah.
Okay.
So I went on the air there, and I would put on. It was a small station, right? And and one of the guys there said, "Hey, Tom, you do comedy? We're doing a comedy benefit." And I'm like, "Oh shit, I don't really do comedy. I've never done comedy, but I want to do comedy." So then I said, "Oh, I have to write a set." So I wrote it. So I go, okay, I have to go up in front of people. So I bought a Shure SM58 microphone, a mic stand. In the meantime, I'm trying to raise money for this experimental engine, which we end up doing. We end up raising money to build this experimental engine. Okay. So but in the meantime, I'm practicing I'm there, and I remember we had a early Macintosh computer, and I'm just reading my line, out to nobody. And then my first time ever on stage in front of people was for this benefit. Yeah. Right. And I did pretty well. You know what I mean? I had nobody helping me, nobody who would, not that you need somebody to help you, but I was so raw, and my material, even my jokes, like I said the word menstruation in my joke, and it was and my sister went, and her boyfriend and a bunch of my friends went to watch it. My sister's like, oh, why did you say that? I go, I mean, I don't know why I said it, but I said it. Anyway, that started. So that was my first. So
that's
set.
Into the writing.
Then and then I said, okay, I'm going to go to the Improv where they have open mic night. So I went to the original Improv in New York City, and there were like 8 people in the audience. You put your name in to a hat, and if your name gets pulled out, you get to go on. So I went on that night. There was like 6 people in the audience, including my girlfriend. I go on, and it goes terribly, right? There's 6 people. I mean, I have no experience of doing a set, and even the spotlight is new to me. So you walk on stage,
can't see
and
anything.
the spotlight is blinding you, right? And I'm like saying my jokes, and then I come off stage, and Silver Friedman, who owned it then, she and her husband started it, and they got divorced. She kept the original one, and he started all the others. In the one on Melrose, I think is the first one that he started. She says to me when I come off, she goes, how long have you been doing it? And I said, tonight. And so she goes, okay, come back in 6 months.
How many minutes did you do?
I think I did 7 minutes, maybe.
Wow.
8 minutes, like that, 7 minutes. And so
long time if you haven't done it before.
Oh, yeah. Yes. and with flop sweat. And yes.
So she said, come back.
Come back in 6 months. And I said, well, what if I get really good in like a few weeks? And she was not, I mean, she must have heard every, she would, like Andy Kaufman was like, she's seen everybody. And she goes, just come back in 6 months. So I go, okay. So then I do about 60 open mic nights between then and when I go back. And in the meantime, I had, this is such a circuitous path, but for the experimental engine, I was doing an animation of how it worked. The absolute first animation program came out on the Mac. And I called the company and they said, one guy in New Jersey bought our thing near you. So I called that guy up. I go, hey, I need to do an animation. Can I use your thing? It's weird because I'm like, and he goes, sure. And this guy had made a lot of money in the stock market and he was going to write movies and stuff. And he invites me to his house to a party. And I come to his house and he goes, hey, this is my friend. He used to write for Bob Hope. Wow. Okay. Still a young guy though.
Yeah.
And I go, I'm starting to do comedy. And I go over to his house and we were writing jokes together. And he was great at writing jokes. And I used some of those jokes and I was doing stand up for 6 months. I go back to the Improv 6 months later. Now it's a packed house. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to kill because I've done well in 6 months. Yeah. I've done a lot more shows now. I'm used to the spotlight.
More comfortable
and stuff. Yeah. Full house. I go up, eat it like a dog and bomb. And now I go, holy shit. I go, I thought I was funny. What happened? And there was a guy there, Stu Kamens is his name. And he goes, Tom, you're doing jokes that aren't you. He goes, walk around with a notepad and just write down everything. Right. Because he's like, you're funny, but you're doing these jokes I was doing Bob Hope jokes.
Oh, okay.
I was doing these not really me jokes. So then, Malcolm, now at the Experimental Engine Company, my friend comes in with these set of tapes. He goes, Tom, you got to listen to these tapes. They're unbelievable. I go, okay, what is it? He goes, it's a guy named Anthony Robbins. I go, okay, never heard of him. Yeah. I go, never heard of him. At this point, though, Malcolm, I'm desperate. Right. I'm like 26 now. I've just bombed. I'm like, shit, I'm not funny. I'm not going to go on stage again because I bombed. And I listened to that whole series. And the one thing, Malcolm, that landed with me in that series, because, look, now you can be a caricature, whatever. But the one thing that landed was, or two things. One was, how long do you give the average baby to walk? Right? And it's like, what do you mean? Yeah. When the baby gets up and falls and you go, okay, that's, you know what? 10 times, you're done. You're done. Just give it up. You're not walking. The baby doesn't shame themselves or go, man, I can't walk. The baby just keeps doing. And then the other thing was like, how long is an airplane off course when they're flying from LA to Hawaii? They just they're off course, but they're constantly correcting. And it's like, that's how you have to look at your life. You might be off course, but just correct and stay. So then I said, okay. And I sat there, and this is kind of the end of the start of doing stand-up. I sat there at the office. I listened to that whole series in a month, and I did I was so desperately like, shit, I got to do it. And I sat there and I wrote one joke. I go, okay, let me try this joke. And then I drove to Hackensack, New Jersey to the open mic night. And I did that joke on stage and it got a huge laugh. And I was like, okay, let me just start writing with my notebook.
This is who I am, yeah.
Yeah, and I realized, I mean, it was a circuitous path. It was only 6 months of doing that, but of trying to do other material and stuff. But you're terrible at stand up. Forget first 6 months. You really aren't yourself for like 6 years. And you really have to be going up and doing it and not being.
Can I ask you though, because whenever I hang out with you, you're just a naturally funny guy. But do you actually write it on a piece of paper or on your phone?
You write it.
Is that so you can remember? Why do you? Yeah, write
you have to write it because committing to paper is just a process that helps your brain. Even like writing your goals down. Yeah. You know what I mean? I don't know why it is, but writing.
It's a process.
Yeah, writing. You can't, because also if you're doing a 45-minute set,
right?
You want to write. If you ever look at Ray or even like Gary Shandling, I have these pictures of Gary Shandling's papers.
He was meticulous, right?
It looks like Charles Manson. No, but they're writing, writing. And Ray's are super, but there's something about that process. And also, you're continually improving. The way stand-up is written is not, okay, let me sit down and write 45 minutes. It's here's a bit about, I have a friend, Malcolm, who's a drummer, right?
Right.
Let me think about what is funny about that. And
Right.
then you're writing, and then you do one funny joke, and then 3 months later, you're like, oh, this is a tag for that
So
joke.
it's almost like a whiteboard where you're just working it
Building,
out.
yeah, everything is being worked. So if you're not judgmental, like, here, I'll give you an example. When we were writing that short film with Dan Aykroyd, with Simon Ford,
Yeah.
we were with a few of my friends who had written comedy, and Simon had never written comedy. And we said something, he goes, that's not funny. And we're like, yeah, not yet, because we have to make it funny.
Right.
You know, so in the Loves Raymond writer's room, you'd be like, what about this idea?
Oh, so you're making like a roadmap, and then you make it funny.
Yes. And you're making, yes, is it a good story for
So
Raymond?
even now, like you say once in a while that you'll open up and get the crowd ready for Ray Romano.
Right.
But you guys are both going to write down what you're doing, unless it's something that's you've been doing for a while,
Yeah. Well, I just
like material.
Yeah. He had our friend Jon Manfrellotti, who's an exceptionally funny human being. He usually opens for Ray now, right? I'm doing other stuff, not that.
Right.
And so, but I opened for Ray for years and years and years, right?
Yeah.
Kennedy Center, all this big, gigs. But John was sick and he couldn't do it. And so I had to substitute.
This wasn't that long ago, right? I think
Yeah.
I remember within the last 2 years, right?
Oh, it was 6 months ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because I opened for Ray and Danny Carvey in Vegas too.
Right.
That was like right before COVID. But this was like 6 months ago. And this was a casino with like 1,200 people. I'm like, okay, let me try some new material, which I did. So Ray has his material down pat. Like he'll bring a notepad. He'll go to like the Hermosa Beach Comedy Magic Club and try it. But even like I remember talking to Kelly Carlin, George Carlin's daughter, about him writing. And it was just, you're just constantly writing. And I think that's really what separates, I know like Robert Klein is an amazing comedian and a huge influence on Seinfeld, but I don't know that Robert had the same, I don't think anybody has the same writing discipline that
That's
Carlin
fascinating
or
because
Seinfeld.
I haven't seen too many comedy shows, but comparably, I saw Sarah Silverman once, but she had like a pad of paper up there.
Yeah.
And she was trying new jokes. But then I saw Bill Burr, maybe a week later, he just came out with nothing and just destroyed the audience. And he didn't seem like he had any notes.
It depends what you're doing. So where did you see him? What was it at
It was on Sunset.
a Comedy Store?
Yes, Comedy Store. That was it.
So it all depends what you're doing. Like if Sarah's like, I'm working out this new material, like even with Gary Shanley. So here, when Ray does a show in Vegas for 1,200 people.
Right. And I've been to one of those. Yeah.
Yeah. He shouldn't be looking at, a person shouldn't be
Right.
figuring out their act. But at Hermosa Beach, where you're doing, whatever, you can be working and have a pad and Ray be like, all right, let me see, but,
So there's a lot of prep. That's what you're saying. And
There's
that's
a-
when you write. And there's a point where you just need to commit.
well, you have to say it on stage. So in other words, if you think of a funny idea, my joke that I wrote that got a first laugh, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, this is me. I went up to a girl at a bar. I start talking to her. I get like 2 words out, and she just stops me. She's like, you just want to take me to dinner and then have sex. And I was thinking, I've already eaten. So that was my joke. Okay. Yeah. So I don't know how you.
You're very observational.
Well,
humor,
I don't,
yeah.
but that joke, if I were to, it's kind of a crass joke, but if I were to pursue it now, it'd be like, okay, you get into it and you would add a opening to that joke and a closing to that joke. And so you might just be like, oh, let me try, that might get a big laugh or not. But you would be like, okay, how do I get there? Like, oh, I'm single. So talk about single. And then that's a joke that's in the middle of being single. So I don't know anybody that doesn't write down their joke. You have to write down your joke. It's too much material. You know what I mean? It's like,
Right.
I think there's a thing with Seinfeld where he takes all his papers and puts it on the street. Like there's a picture of on the street in the village of all of his jokes. And it's like a crazy amount of jokes.
I think I know what you're saying, though, because my wife, Christy, and I, we just watched the new Fluffy comedy special.
Okay.
And it was really, you could tell it was laid out. Like there was an intro.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different things, but they all tied in. And it's one of those things where he took a joke from the beginning and then he ended with the same type of vibe. So having a roadmap, having
Like
a
a
structure.
callback,
But a lot of you guys that do that, there is some improv involved, right?
It depends who it is.
Can you read the room and add something? Or not really?
For Ray as an example, Ray he's so good, but everything is written. And the way, I should even go back. The way I even met Ray was at the Improv. And then I read about, this will answer your question too. But I met Ray at the Improv in New York. And there was a guy there who's like, hey, Ray Romano needs a softball player for his team. And I was a very good softball player. So I wanted to play softball. And we won 2 championships with me playing softball on the 59th Street Bridge. We became friends. There was a couple of gigs. He's like, do you want to open for me? Okay. This is way before he doesn't even have twins yet. Okay. He has 1 daughter. Now he has 4 kids, just FYI for people. And we're talking about Ray Romano, who's the star of Loves Raymond and has gone on to do a lot of other things. So when I would open for him, I was single. He was married. I would ad lib. He would never ad lib. Okay. So yeah, we complimented each other perfectly. So I didn't do any, my wife, she's really none of those jokes. Right. Me being single, ad libbing, within reason. And you don't want a comedian that ad libs too much, right? Because it sets a different tone for the audience. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's kind of improv, but the audience is impressed that you're improving stuff like that. So, and one time we did a convention for the mothers of twins. Okay. And I went up and I had
good one for Ray. Right?
I had lived for like 30 minutes and Ray's in back going, why did I bring Tom? Because I was killing, right? I was just talking to the audience and talking to the people and making stuff up. And Ray went up and killed without ad-libbing at all. He did all his twins material. He's an amazing comedian. But so some comedians ad-lib. Seinfeld doesn't ad-lib. Someone yells something
Robin
out.
Williams did a lot though.
Yeah,
right?
Robin Williams was, he was a completely different animal. It's just also you can't
Everybody's
rely.
different.
Yeah, you can't rely on ad-libbing. Brian Regan is one of the best comedians ever. And we were at after a taping of Loves Raymond, and he was there. He goes, man, how do you guys think of stuff on the fly? He goes, that's like my worst nightmare is having to think of, and this is one of the funnier human beings on the planet.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And he's like, it's not his skill set, which is, look, for music too, right? Yeah. The idea of ad-libbing licks and stuff versus a classical, where there's no ad-libbing. Yeah,
I think I've told you before, 2 of my favorite drummers are Phil Collins and Bill Bruford, but one of the reasons why it didn't work out in Genesis when Bill joined is Phil plays the same every night. Bill plays different every night.
Yeah.
So I can see what you say. You either have to get to the point where you compliment or maybe it's not going to work.
By the way, yes, absolutely. Well, if I went up and just did 20 minutes of marriage material and then Ray goes up and does 20 minutes of marriage material, there is going to be some crossover. This we should, you can even cut this out. Or maybe this will be the only interesting part. At Live Aid, they kind of reunite Led Zeppelin.
Right. Yeah, we've talked about this. Yeah.
And Phil Collins, for your audience, Phil Collins is the drummer. I didn't realize it because it was Robert Plant basically saying we weren't good because our drummer was whatever. And I'm like, oh, Phil Collins was the drummer, though. He's a fairly good drummer. Like what, as a drummer, I'm like, what happened? I'm not me as a drummer. I'm asking you.
I've read so many different perspectives on this. And my guess from being a drummer myself is you've got 2 drummers. You've got Tony Thompson, who's from the Power Station, astounding drummer. You've got Phil Collins, who's in Genesis and played with a million people. A lot of musicians play ahead of the beat or behind the beat or right on the beat. They say East Coast is ahead of the beat, West Coast is behind. I think Tony, if you really listen to him, he plays ahead of the beat and Phil really lays back. But so you've got 2 different personalities of drummers. And when you've done double drumming like I have, you've really got to listen, like you were talking about, and have some give and take. You just don't want to do a fill while someone else is doing a fill.
Right.
You clobber it. But from what I read, I think Led Zeppelin practiced with Tony. And Phil was, taking the Concorde flying back and forth. And he grew up knowing Zeppelin. He's like, yeah, sure. But I think Robert had asked him last minute too. And I think because the 5 of them didn't rehearse. At the end of the day, I don't really think it's anybody's fault. Whoever was in charge of organizing this dropped the ball and should have thought that, boy, they should have a rehearsal. But, man, I think all 5 of those people are astounding. And it was just a musician have a bad night, but this happened to be in front of the whole world.
It's one of the biggest audience ever. Yeah. And people were longing to see any inkling of Zeppelin again. So it was
in defense of Phil, why don't you check out Robert Plant's solo albums with Phil on drums? Like I'm in the Mood. It's just kills it. Yeah.
I'm just as a novice, as a non-drummer, I'm like, because I heard Robert Plant going, well, the drummer was, and I was like, oh, isn't the drummer Phil Collins? And, anyway.
They're all good, but things can go wrong, just like you were saying about comedy. I also wanted to ask you, what about your parents? Were they creative? And as you look at what you do now, you're an amazing photographer, comedian, puppeteer. Is there anything in your life that you go, wow, I think I got that from my dad, or I think I got that from my mom?
Very good question.
Like my dad was very different than me, but he had a big work ethic, and I'm like that too. I'm just like, go, go, go. I can't stop.
Oh, yeah.
So what do you think you got from your dad or your mom?
I would say, it's funny because I know I have an appreciation of I have such a love of music.
Yes.
So my father was obsessed with jazz, so much so that my father was a auto mechanic, like I said, and then he rose, to become what's known as a service manager.
Yeah.
But he was obsessed with cars, right? That was his business.
Right.
And I grew up working on car. Like that's why you're looking at my lighting grid. I'm very familiar with, we would rebuild engine, everything on a car. But my father's love was jazz. So he volunteered for a place called WBGO Jazz.
Oh, I didn't. I knew your dad liked jazz, but I didn't know.
Yeah,
that.
so 88.3. He was there for 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so he even guest DJ'd a couple times, But I was so surrounded by jazz growing up and my father bought music. He had an organ. He wanted us to play the B3 organ. He loved, he loved Jimmy McGriff and Jimmy Smith. And
organ trios. Yeah.
Yeah. So, oh my God. So I will tell you a couple stories related to that where, for me, and we didn't. My sister and I, neither of us can play an instrument. I love guitar. I love classical guitar.
Right.
I love music so much. I used to. Well, I won't. I'll go off on that tangent.
Well, just for
a second.
listeners, almost this is the only time I've come over here and you're not playing Django Reinhardt.
Oh yeah. So I would say this, because I'm so into conversation. I don't have a TV in my house. I don't have it. There's no TV upstairs or downstairs. I don't have a TV. I never watch TV. And I worked in TV, and they used to make fun of me in the Raymond writers' room. They're like, "Tom, you're in TV. Watch some TV." Because they'd come in on casting. They go, "We're thinking about going to this actress." I'd be like, "Who is that?" And they're like, "How do you not know who that is? Come on."
Yeah.
So, but I love conversation. There's nothing better to me. So I always am listening to music. Yeah. So we can't play it now because it would cost, your podcast would cost $2.3 million as you have a soundtrack of that. But my father did volunteer work for the jazz stage. So I would be surrounded by jazz. And I mean like big jazz. I mean like, hey, come to Gulliver's because this group is going to be doing a big concert, but they're warming up. It's the Modern Jazz Quartet. Okay?
No, know your stuff. I'll never forget the one time. I mean, I'm a drummer, and I came over and you're like, "Here, check out this Art Blakey album."
Oh yeah.
And I met him. I saw him play. I
you
never
did?
heard of the album.
Wow.
And that's not one of my favorite ones. Yeah.
Oh yeah, an Orgy in Rhythm. It's
Yes.
like an amazing thing. So I would hear the Modern Jazz Quartet. I saw Max Roach. I saw Dizzy Gillespie.
Oh, man.
I saw Toots Thielman. I was surrounded by all of this jazz. And even I remember one time I had a high school reunion and I stayed out all night long for this high school reunion. And my father's like, "You're coming with me to this B3 Hammond organ jazz jam in Newark." Okay.
Wow.
So I go and I've slept like 1 hour.
Yeah.
And I have to say, if there's anything that's going to keep you awake, it's a marathon B3 jazz organ jam. It's so uplifting. It was so good. So from my father, I think I got that. But I didn't love it as a high school jazz. I would hear Dave Brubeck and stuff. And it wasn't until I bought the All Music Guide to Jazz while I was working on Loves Raymond, and I just went crazy exploring jazz.
He really gave you an awareness of that. And then you ended up writing an episode for your dad, right?
So on Loves Raymond, this relates to photography. This ties in a lot of stuff. So on Loves Raymond, we went 9 years. We did 210 episodes, and you're always looking for story ideas.
God.
And what you're trying to do is have real life events and bring those and relate them to the show. So in real life, my father had a heart attack, and I had to fly back to New Jersey, and I had to do a set at the Improv, and I remember I was ironing a shirt, and while I was ironing the shirt, I'm watching a documentary about this photographer named Herman Leonard. He was an amazing jazz photographer, okay?
Wow.
A crazy jazz photographer. So I fly back to, and it was on PBS and was narrated by Tony Bennett. Fly back to New Jersey. I'm in with my uncle my father's had the operation. I'm sitting there in the hospital with my uncle. I'm telling him, we're making small talk. I go, "Uncle Joe, I just saw a documentary about Herman Leonard. He's an amazing photographer. Every jazz, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, all this stuff." And he goes, "Herm?" He goes, "I know Herm." And I go, "What do you mean you know Herm?" He goes, "Yeah, we went to college together. I used to help him with his flash. I was an electrical engineer." I go, You never told me that. He goes, I never. I go, have you ever talked to him since then? He goes, yeah, I talk to him a couple times a year. I go, I go, he's living in New Orleans. He goes, do you think you could call him? I go, I'd love to meet with him. It would be awesome, right?
Yeah.
And so I come back to LA and I look up. This is when Amazon, I don't think existed yet. Barnes and Noble search engine. I search on the computer, and Herman Leonard books, right? And one pops up. And it's at the Iliad. One pops up in the country, and it's at the Iliad bookstore, like a mile from where I'm sitting. I race there. I buy this book. It's published in France. It's famous photographers, Billie Holiday and Louis Armstrong photos and Frank Sinatra photos, and they're handwritten, his notes under each photo. So that inspired me. We ended up meeting with Herman Leonard. But that inspired me to do the Loves Raymond photo book in the exact same style.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we did and I said to Ray, Romano, and Phil Rosenthal, I said, listen, we can use my photos. You guys write hand captions under the photos.
Oh, that's where that came from.
Then I end up doing a episode called Jazz Records with Oscar Peterson.
One of my favorites.
Yeah, and it's a great episode. And it's funny because Oscar Peterson's daughter wrote to me and said, hey, my father... We were at something and people were like, hey, your father was on the, he wasn't there, but his record was there. Ben Webster, who was one of my father's favorite sax players, meets Oscar Peterson.
Yeah.
Probably more people heard his song on that episode than ever heard it as a jazz record. Right? Because if 25 million people aren't listening to a jazz record, but they did on that episode, you know, and it was very,
The old way to go viral.
Yes. It was rare. It was, but so that's all tied in, you know, to the same.
That's starting to make sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, how about your mom or any part of your
my
personality?
mom loved to sing, and my mom also loved music.
Yeah.
But didn't. So my mother was that, and my mother had a very big personality. My mother was very outgoing, super outgoing. So I think that type of thing, and just very, my mother grew up in World War II Germany as a German, so she was a little teeny kid who experienced terrible trauma, obviously, and so she was very worldly. She came over to the United States at 21, and she, so when I was 16, I visited Germany, and I had a cousin there, and she put me on a train, and I went from one end of Germany to the other to meet my cousin. You know what I mean? So there was a fearlessness, and I think as I tell
this sense of adventure.
Well, when I even think, and then I called him up, and then I called up this TV, that most people, well, just like when you reached out to me,
right?
And what did you reach out to me originally? You were asking for money originally, right? But then, I'm kidding, everybody. He didn't. No, most people will be helpful. Yeah. Especially unless you're too busy, but you can't call Spielberg and be like, hey, I want to get into movies. You know what I mean? But you can, but, I'm just saying that sense of adventure, just going back to my mother, like there's a sense of, a big personality,
strong
and worldly,
spirit, sounds like.
Yeah, strong spirit and worldly.
From overcoming the trauma and just, making the best out of everything, right?
Yes, and going, and oddly, my father and my mother were both really into photography. My mother worked in a photography store. And my father always had a Bolex camera, and he would film us.
You always knew the gear. You probably knew about the fixer, like how to do old school developing and on the.
No, I didn't know developing. No, but it's funny that this just popped in my head now. Yeah. My father I found my father's old microphone that I used for the Mr. Clown talk show.
From the radio show?
Not from the radio show. He just had a microphone. I didn't know he had it's believe it or not, I don't know the model, but people who play harmonica will know it. It's a diastatic model. Diastatic. That's a malt powder. I use it to make my beer. The company is Diastatic, I think it is. People are slapping their forehead going, you moron. But it's a microphone that's used for harmonica. But that mic, I found when my father died, I had to go through all his stuff, and I'm like, oh, what's this old microphone? So he was into filming and making movies and stuff, never professionally, but as a hobby. He would take pictures, and tons of pictures of him with jazz artists, et cetera. And my mother was in photography too. So
there's a lot of connections.
Yeah, which is funny that I never even really thought of it until now. By the way, there's a great interview at the Actors Studio, and he's talking to Spielberg. Yeah. And he's saying about Close Encounters.
Yes.
And he's saying, you're the tone that's playing, and the interviewer goes, oh, like you're trying to reach out to your parents, a computer tone and a this tone.
Oh, wow.
And Spielberg literally goes, I never thought about that until just now. It's amazing to watch, because you're like, you would think Spielberg would go, Malcolm, there's a very famous book by a psychiatrist, and it's called The Drama of the Gifted Child. What is her name? Alice Miller? She's a psychiatrist, but her whole theory is that you have these traumas in childhood and you spend your adult life trying to work them out.
Right.
Right. And so on the simpler level, and I think I should add this when we're talking about like early on playing with dolls and doing puppets and do comedy. I was really into psychology. And the way that Ray Romano and I originally bonded was over psychology. So I would listen to, there was a guy who, not that he was controversial, but a guy named David Viscott, and he wrote this book called The Making of a Psychiatrist, and he had a call-in show, and he was really good at diagnosing people, right?
Wow.
And so I would, my father was not that present, and it became almost like a father figure, but people would call in, and he would diagnose people really quickly, right? And I was fascinated by that. And so when Ray was going through some stuff, we bonded over psychology. So in the drama of the gifted child, it's that theory that we are longing to try and fit, Picasso, everybody. It's like, what are the traumas of your childhood and how are you working them out?
John Lennon with the scream therapy.
Yes. Well, on the simplest level in psychology, it's like your father's an alcoholic, so you seek out an alcoholic to date to work out that child. I mean, that's the on the nose version of it, So it's a very interesting psychological thing that plays into, in other words, somebody coming from, my father always did this. My father was a comedian, as the on the nose example. But for me, psychology was the way in more to comedy and analyzing stuff for show. For Loves Raymond is such a psychological show. You know what I mean? Like that. Like, what is at play? What are the hidden agendas that are at play in a family dynamic?
So it brings many layers.
Yes, brings so many layers versus, you have to be funny, but like, what is at play here? What is the subtext of the scene?
That's why that's such a good show to go back and rewatch, because you're going to catch, just like jazz music, you're going to catch all the stuff you didn't the first time.
Well, it's layered. It has more depth than, the shows that are funnier joke per joke than Raymond easily. You know what I mean? But if you're looking for working out the family dynamic, especially with a controlling mother-in-law, like anybody who's listening who has a controlling person in their life, they're brutal. It's brutal. Like you just want to get away from them. And Marie.
Right, and there's so many different types of personalities that everybody can relate with one of them.
Oh, yeah. And also you age through it.
That's why I like Chris Elliott.
Chris Elliott. He is one of the nicest. He is just a nice guy.
One of my favorites.
And brilliant guy.
Do you think creativity could be implemented in curing people or helping people with mental health struggles like depression, anxiety? Any specific insight with depression or anxiety?
I mean, it's funny that we were talking about psychology, and that's the biggest thing, because the obviously yes, but I think life is so hard for everybody. When you're on the outside, especially when you're looking at Hollywood stuff, you're like, like I saw an interview with Paul McCartney where they're like, what's a misconception about you? He's like, I don't really know what people are thinking about me. He goes, but one thing is that you don't have any insecurities. When you've reached a certain, like once you're a Beatle, you should be like, I'm pretty confident that I'm good. Not the case.
I think I saw that on YouTube Shorts within the last week.
Yeah. It's not the case at all, right? You have an insecurity. So you should be like,
right.
And that goes, and so once you accept that you have these insecurities and going through life, that's for everybody across the board. So there's this weird thing like, once I make it, or once I do, there are so many unhappy, successful people, you know? So just for creativity, one of the things that, even on the level of making bread, right? I started making bread in 2001. Jon Manfrellotti is like, hey, let's make pizza dough. And I'm like, how are we going to make, it sounded like making gold from hay. I don't know how to make dough.
So that's what that came from, John?
John, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So John, it was...
And because of you, by the way, I've been his drummer for almost 8
years
now.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah. I hear the pay is great. So, and for those of you, Jon Manfrellotti is a comedian. For those who don't know, and he was on Loves Raymond. He played Johnny on Loves Raymond, but he's an old...
what's the other show, though? I just finally watched
Men of a Certain Age.
Such a good show.
Phenomenal show, yeah.
And John's incredible.
On TBS, yeah. They're a phenomenal show with Ray and Andre Braugher and Scott Bakula, who that character was based on me.
That I didn't know. I just watched it.
Yeah, so... That I'm not saying in a bragging way, and it's poetic license. So whenever people would watch a Raymond episode and be like, "Are you eavesdropping?" Like on, like seriously,
totally makes sense.
Yeah. Well, the guy I'm not, I don't judge, but I don't smoke pot. I'm not a stoner in any way.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like if you are, great. The Beatles did pretty well, stoned. But that, there's certain elements of that.
Yeah.
But the reason I know it is I had someone call me once, and I was in Buffalo, right?
Yeah.
I was in Buffalo, New York, and going to a Buffalo Bills game. And I get a call and like, are you okay? I go, what do you mean? Well, I mean, I read about you in the New York Times. I'm like, there's nothing about me in the New York Times, And she's like, it's a quote from Ray. And then the New York Times says, a lot of people should watch the show, especially, Tom Caltabiano, who's the Scott Bakula character is based on. Right. And so I was like, oh, why? So what it was, just for the audience, Men of a Certain Age was a show that was originally sold to HBO. The president of HBO who approved it got fired. Then it took 4 years to get it to be sold to TBS. And then it went on the air and it did a limited run because it got canceled. And it's an outstanding show. But the Scott Bakula character is a single guy who's a Peter Pan guy in the show.
Right.
And so because there was another character based on me as well, which in a show called Rules of Engagement.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Which my friend wrote, and the David Spade character he based on me. And so and it's not because of, it sounds like I'm not bragging. I'm just saying clearly I'm into puppets, baking bread, travel. Like I have a very eclectic level of interest in a bunch of things.
Yeah.
And my friend Tom Hertz, who created Rules of Engagement, he used to make fun because I'm so enthusiastic about stuff, but it's a genuine enthusiasm. And so I don't make up my enthusiasm for baking bread. You know what I mean? It's not like I go, I better act enthusiastic about Malcolm. And as you know, Malcolm, it's so hard to get anything done, any headway, any project. It's just brutal. Even if you're like, I'm helping children and I want to help children and I'm, and I'll make sacrifices and do it. And there's amount of obstacles in your way for like a feel good, let alone, if we were like, hey, let's figure out a way to make a lot of money, then you're like, okay, well, people aren't going to be like, go get them, and now it's like still trying to help children. It's like, there's still all the obstacles, which is like, raising money and doing, trying to make money, all this stuff. So there's it takes an enthusiastic, you can't be easily discouraged, And so just, by the way, only because to connect the dots for me, when I was doing stand up and I would open for Ray a lot, Ray did a set on Letterman where I went and took pictures and whatever. And then he got a development deal. Right. And then he said, hey, do you want to work on the show? I don't know if I can get you on the show. That's how that happened. And I remember I was fighting in a jiu-jitsu tournament in Philadelphia and I had a pager. And I get paged and I call Ray from Philadelphia. Right. And I go, Ray, what's up? He goes, do you want to go to LA? Do you want to work on the show? And I go, sure. I have nothing. I'm living with two other comedians. I had already owned a house, sold a house. I had a room the size of a shoebox. And I'm like, I got everything I own fits in a suitcase. Yeah. And he goes, well, it's probably going to get canceled, because most shows do. I'm not going to move my family. So let's. Because
he went through that other show first, right?
Well, he got fired from News Radio the first day. Yeah. So his career has lasted one day. So he's felt the non-success.
So just giving you a heads up, by the way.
Yeah. So he goes, come out. We might be back in 6 weeks, but come out. I'm not going to move my family or anything. We'll share an apartment. And so we did. And, I didn't, I was generally enthusiastic. I was just like, yeah, I'll help. Not like, it was just that. Like, I'll help Ray be funnier. Like that's the thought. And it's a new adventure, and there's nothing. And that's, I was saying at the very beginning, it's like when you really have nothing to lose, it's like, and I think the problem, especially with most people, is if you're semi-successful, you have a house, you have kids, you can't walk away and be like, I'll take a job for $400 a week and leave you can't, so that's why you're almost better as you're younger too, living with 9 roommates and having no monthly nut and having those freedom. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because it's very hard, as you know, to walk away from, you have obligations. Yeah. And so once you have kids, you know what I mean? You can't be like,
you're making me think of, I just listened to a recording of Albert Camus, great writer. Yeah. And he was talking about how he discovered through life that you can't learn to deal with life until you finally say, what do I got to lose? And then you finally figure out who you are. Because he was saying in here, you can make as much money as you want, you can do all this, but it's not going to help you at all. Yeah. And once you realize there's nothing to lose and you can be who you truly are, then it sounds like that's what happened with you.
Yeah, well,
Right.
it allowed you. Well, even now with Mr. Clown, which we haven't even talked about really, it is an interesting little segue.
As far as Mr. Clown, so everybody knows Tom has this great puppet character named Mr. Clown. Do I have this right? You've actually been into puppetry 30 years, or is that when you got the first Mr. Clown?
Yeah,
So take me back. Like, how did that all begin?
Yeah. Hello, hi, how are you? It's on KLCS PBS local station, but it's now available on the app.
Okay, and
on the PBS.org app.
Okay, so everybody can just download it on their
anybody
phones.
can see it. Yeah,
Hilarious show too.
yeah,
Really fun.
It's only on 2. It's Mr. Clown has a talk show with no guests, and he has Tommy the Tomato as his co-host, and Milton the dog is always a very funny guy played by Victor Yerrid. And then we have Ray Romano in it, who reads from a book, Allison Janney, who's misinformation, and Phil Rosenthal, who introduces Mr. Clown to food. And it's just a kind of zany.
And Rick Marotta did the music.
Rick Marotta does the music. Yeah, it's a zany. Actually, Rick has a huge part, but it's a very fun show that we wanted to be adult friendly and kid friendly, teaching kids 7 and under as much as they have to learn, and the sense of adventure and fun that I think Sesame Street had, and
can I ask you about that? One reason why I've been disappointed in some newer puppet shows that I shall not name is when we grew up, the puppet shows were popular, I think, because they would speak to the kids and teach them, but also us as the parents, we'd be laughing our heads off because there's some material that's over the kids' heads, and everybody enjoys it. And as you grow up, then you learn to appreciate the whole thing. You're one of the only people that I've seen make a kids show like that I think the whole family would have fun and the parents wouldn't be bored.
Yeah. And by the way, it depends what you're trying to accomplish. I thank you, Malcolm. And you probably don't know this, or maybe you do. When I started doing Mr. Clown 30 years ago, I would do it for my friends' kids. You know what I mean? Like, that's it. And then I got Loves Raymond.
But how did you do that, though? You just got a puppet and just...
Yeah, I'll tell you the story. But what I was going to say is you're pivotal in introducing me to schools and doing live schools and knowing what works in schools. Right. And then when COVID hit, I was able to do 1,000 live Zooms to kids all over the world.
I don't even know how many we did, too.
Yeah,
just even with my school,
Just your school. And
every classroom.
Yes. And what that allowed me to do was see what works, because I would, I could go up at the Kennedy Center in front of 1,000 people.
Yes.
That's not I did that a lot.
Right.
But entertaining 5 and 6-year-olds with a puppet, that was like, oh man, I don't know, because you can't with them, you can't with it, and you don't know, are they even listening?
And we did ages at that time 4 to 10, and that's a 4-year-old. That's tough to keep their attention. They did it though.
Yeah. But what that allowed, I'll go back, but what that allowed me to do is, and I think this is what the lesson is, you have to be terrible a lot, like playing drums, doing
just like
anything.
The comedy you were saying, right?
Just do it. And so me doing the 1,000 live Zooms to kids around the country, my game from 2019 to 2020 was amazing to do that. So for Mr. Clown, it's just, I was doing stand-up, and I remember I was really depressed. It was my birthday, and I was walking through a mall, and I saw all these dolls in a... in one of those open things where they have stuffed animals, how the malls are or were back then. And I thought, I go, what a great looking face. And just, I don't know, I just bought the doll.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? I'm going to make a puppet version of this doll. So then.
Oh, so it was first a doll.
Yeah. Well, it was like a doll, but I don't know why it made me smile. It's something about it's so weird. It just made me smile. And I go, okay. So I go, where do I get a doll? Where do I make a puppet? I don't know. This is I don't think the internet existed, but it wasn't like now, like best doll makers in the world, right?
Right.
So I go, okay, well, let me look up. There's a ventriloquist convention in Kentucky. So I get in I don't like to name drop, or brag, but I had a 1998 Plymouth Horizon, light blue 4-door Plymouth Horizon. And so I get in that and I drive to Kentucky for the festival. And there... I'm
starting to see a pattern with the impulsive behavior.
Well, not even impulsive, but no, driven and be like, so just do it. That's the thing. So then I drive and I meet the woman who did Jeff Dunham's Peanut character.
Oh,
Jeff Dunham is a ventriloquist.
Incredible.
A very successful ventriloquist. So I see the dummy, the person that builds his character Peanut. Her name was, I don't think she's still around, Verna. Okay. So I go, hey, I want to get this type of puppet. I want to build this, maybe more this is this. Great. every ounce of money I had, because at that point I was broke. I was living with two other comedians, two other people, and $384 was my rent. Right.
And as we know, puppets are expensive.
Right. So then
go on.
I wait a year.
Yeah.
She sends it.
Wow.
It's phenomenally well built, and I hate it. It's looks like a drunk uncle clown, right? And
this is the one that I saw, right?
I don't even know if you've seen this one too.
No, we were doing an episode once, and I came over here, and I think you forgot I was going to come over, and you forgot that you had left Mr. Clown somewhere else, and you said, I have the original. And you had to make it like Mr. Clown's uncle because it was a little too
real, weird.
Yeah, it was a little.
And by the way, I'm not a fan of. I'm agnostic about clowns.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of clowns. I don't hate clowns, but I'm not a clown.
You're agnostic about clowns.
No, I mean some
Can we
people.
Use that for the title?
I found a lot of clown hatred out there. I found it. It's amazing, and I get it. So then oh my God, I just spent all this money and I hate this puppet. So I'm like, okay, well, this is never going to happen. So then I go back to Kentucky a year later. Now I drive again. And now there's another puppet builder. Her name is Marianne Taylor, right? Okay. She's in Virginia. So I go, hey, I'm trying to make this, a friendly looking. Yeah. I'm like, just think of a snowman with a red nose. Don't think of a clown, just a snowman with a red nose. So then now cut to a friend of mine has to go to Georgia like 6 months later. I go, hey, my clown puppet is ready. And I remember because Pearl Jam had just come out with 10. Okay, that's how long ago this is.
Wow.
So we drive down to, I think she had to go to Georgia or something. And on the way back, we stopped in near Blacksburg, Virginia, somewhere in there. And I pick up this Mr. Clown, and this version is awesome, right? Friendly, cute. And for the next 30 years, by the way, I remember driving with Mr. Clown, and I'm singing with Mr. Clown. It's like
by yourself.
Well, with her driving, I'm just like, even flow, thought to ride like butterflies, singing even flow from Black, right, from the 10 album of Pearl Jam, right, as Mr. Clown. So anyway, I'm just going to cut to, for 30 years I used that puppet, Ray Romano's kids. Everybody's friends, just doing that with the puppet. And I have videotape of me in Ray's apartment or condo. It doesn't mean condo. It's in Queens, New York, right? Yeah. Way before Loves Raymond, with his little twins who are 3 years old.
Wow.
Okay. And it's me and Mr. Clown, and Ray's wife is holding the camera, right? And I remember they couldn't, they're doing well now, but they couldn't afford a dishwasher at that point. They had 3 kids now in the dishwasher. And so there's footage of me going, okay, hi, and the voice kind of came naturally to me. And
that was the question I had. Where did it come from?
It just came, it just came out of me,
I love it though, because there's a lot of times, like, Ren and Stimpy, you can tell where they got the ideas for the voices. Like Peter Lorre or whatever. But yours, nobody sounds like that.
Well, what's funny is older writer on Loves Raymond bizarrely created, the Electric Company with a bunch of other, a few other people. Show? Yeah, the show. Jeremy Stevens.
That was a great show.
And so when I had Mr. Clown, I had him all during Raymond, but I would entertain Patricia Heaton's kids and Ray's kids and have them on the set. And if you look, there's an episode where Ray is putting into Mr. Clown's mouth in the Snow Day episode.
Oh, I didn't know if that was a photo or actually on an episode.
No, that's on an episode of Raymond. And even more.
What episode, just so people know?
Snow Day.
Okay.
Snow Day, I
Go
think
on.
it is. And then there's another thing where I just noticed this year, I'm like, oh my gosh, if you look on the refrigerator, on Loves Raymond, I think season 2 or 3, there is a drawing of Mr. Clown that the little kids did on the refrigerator in the background.
Wow.
Yeah. For all these episodes, I was like, oh my God.
Even
I was
ago.
I was like, oh my gosh. Okay. So now fast forward to, I have a friend who I met, she's a writer. And I said, hey, I really want to get, I'll tell you the story, because this is kind of cool, Malcolm. This ties it together. I would always entertain friends' kids, and they knew that, right? And even before Loves Raymond, I started doing, again, I don't like to name drop, but I started doing like kids' barbershops and balloon animal. I hooked up with a balloon animal guy, and it was funny. Yeah. Then I got Loves Raymond. And so then that got in the way of my puppet success. And so I'm doing a food show in Korea with Heather Graham and Hugh Jackman, okay?
Wow.
Called Kimchi Chronicles. That's on PBS, okay? Do you know Phil Rosenthal has a show called Somebody Feed Phil on Netflix?
Yes, of course.
Before that, he did a couple of shows, and that producer asked me to work with him on this.
How long ago was this?
This is probably 2012.
Okay.
2011, 2012. And I took photos for the book, Kimchi Chronicles.
Right.
It's funny because a friend of mine was in Chicago, and she lives in Chicago. And I knew her way back when from, 1990. And she's like, Tom, I'm taking out a book on Korean cooking. And I open it, and you're credited in this book that I'm taking out in Chicago about a Korean cooking thing. Anyway, here's the interesting part of the story is, I do that show in Korea. I come back. My friend says, hey, if you come to New York, can you bring Mr. Clown to entertain my 5-year-old daughter? Sure. So I do that. I have Mr. Clown in a black Nike bag, right? And then I'm going to visit one of the producers at a place called Whiskey Park and drink and meet his new girlfriend. Okay. He's a 30-year-old, Korean American guy who's an engineer.
Right.
And so, but did TV also. So then I meet him. We're at the bar. And I'm like, hey, Eric, how's it going? And this is nice to meet you, right? And he's like, what's in the duffel bag? And I go, oh, a clown puppet. And he goes, oh, take it out. I go, I'm not taking out a clown puppet at Whiskey Park. Okay. So then cut to, I was teaching him how to make bread at his apartment that night. Yeah. So I teach him how to make bread, whatever. I don't think anything of it. Now, 6 months later, I'm back. I'm on a JetBlue flight going to New York, and he's on the plane. I go, Eric, what's going on? He goes, oh, I'm visiting my parents. He goes, listen, every time I watch that video of Mr. Clown, it just cracks me up. I'm like, what video of Mr. Clown? He goes, when you taught me to make bread, you broke out Mr. Clown. He goes, we were drinking and stuff, and you were doing Korean words and doing all kinds of stuff with him. I go, oh. He goes, why don't we do a cooking show with Mr. Clown? And I go, okay. So we shoot a pilot, right? With a chef, Giacomino Drago.
I want to see that.
Yeah. It's the earliest test. It's terrible. When I watch it, I go, oh my God. So then I sent it to my friend, and she goes, this is good, but can you do the sight words? And I go, I don't even know what sight words are. She's like, those are the basic words. Yeah. She goes, my son has to learn them. I substitute teach. The kids are bored. If you do a Mr. Clown video. So that's what I did. Then what that producer from that show introduced me to a guy who worked for Google. And he said, Tom, I think you could make this bigger than just making videos for your friend. Right. Why don't I help you? Can I invest a little bit of money? I go, there's nothing really to invest in. I go, but I would love to build a better, newer Mr. Clown. So then I go, I don't know how to get that. And my friend, Casey, she introduced me to Victor Yared. So I have dinner with Victor Yared. Yeah. And I go, Victor, hi, I'm Tom, and I have a puppet. And I take out Mr. Clown, and he's looking at it like, okay. And I felt like I was from, the Ozarks, taking out my banjo, which had
missing strings.
Well, but even Bill, he's like, what are these arm mechanisms? I go, oh, that's the rod from a screen door that I use. I use rods from a screen door, and he's looking at it now. In hindsight, I go, oh my God, he must have been like, this guy grew up on an island or something. So he introduced me to puppet builders, and then I met Russ Walco.
He's great.
And Russ Walco said, I think I can make this puppet really cute. I can give him dimples. I can do that. So that brought up in 2013 a new version of Mr. Clown.
Right.
Then
and that's the one in the B video, right, where the hair was a little bit longer.
Well, that is this version. He was just new. So what happened is Russ Walco built it, and then my other friend, who was going to do a show in the Fringe Festival, she said, can you bring Mr. Clown and do a live show for kids? I go, yeah.
Oh, that's how you did that.
So then Victor was going to be there with the puppet up,
right,
playing to 1,000 people.
Oh, wow. Really puppet up.
And I was in a room for 100 people, but, for 40 5-year-olds, and so I did a show every day for a month for kids. That was the first proving ground of Mr. Clown.
How did those go?
The first day I was behind it like a blind, so you couldn't see me. And my friend Aaron Ruby, who came with me, it's funny because I said, come with me to Scotland for a week and help me set up a show. He stayed for 30 days.
Wow.
He missed his wedding anniversary. We put up the show. We filmed everything. Every day we had to keep making the show because we didn't have an hour-long show yet. You know what I mean? We were building it. Like I got Mr. Clown, the new Mr. Clown, delivered 2 days before we left for Scotland. So anyway, we put up the show. We're filming this. We're calling Rick Murata. We're like, Rick, send us music, any music. Like we're trying to do any figures, any bits for the show. So by the end of 30 days, we were great. But the first show, I'm behind there, do it. Okay, goodbye, everybody. The kids rush the stage like it's Elvis. And the editor, Aaron, had to run from the back of the room to keep them from pulling down the blind. And
How did that feel? That must have been great.
Oh, it was great. And then afterwards,
did it shock you a little bit because you'd never planned on being a puppeteer? It must have been a little bit surreal.
Well, it was surreal because, I was used to. I loved doing it.
Laugh,
yeah, well, but with Mr. Clown, especially with kids. So it wasn't like, and it's funny because that proving ground, years later, we just did an entire day at the Paley Center, the Museum of Radio and Television in New York.
Oh, yeah, I saw the photos.
And we did 2 live shows. And afterwards, a meet and greet with Mr. Clown, which now is old hat for me, having done all these live shows and at the school that you did, et cetera. So it was, it was, what it was rewarding and knowing that kids were affected in a good way, and responded. Because you can take out a puppet and people be like scared.
Yeah. Well, let's not forget during the pandemic, a lot of the kids were scared, and you just had them laughing uncontrollably.
Oh yeah. For doing Mr. Clown, yeah. So for the pandemic. Yes.
And by the way, a lot of those kids that are now like 10 or 11 still ask, like, they're like, do you still talk to Mr. Clown? I'm like, oh, yeah. Do you want to have him come into school?
Yeah.
They look both ways. They're like, yeah.
Well, what I find is we endow kids with growing up much quicker.
Yes.
And a 10-year-old is still young.
Right.
A 9-year-old, I know I'm playing mostly to 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds, but an 8-year-old and 9-year-old isn't necessarily out there smoking and swearing.
But I think, too, we learned that no matter what age, they love the chaos. They love when things go wrong.
Yeah. Well, that was from doing those lives. What you learn is Mr. Clown always makes mistakes.
Right.
And that kids love teaching Mr. Clown.
Yeah, so, it becomes interactive. I remember they start shouting, no.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So that's one, all these lessons from doing live, which I'm like, because I will say this, Victor Yared brought up, by meeting Victor, we instantly were doing videos that were Sesame Street quality. We had no money, but Victor was so good.
Oh my God.
And so that's why I was like, Victor, just do, the worst thing could be is like, and this I found in general, Malcolm, anybody who has insecurities, it's unfortunate, but, I'm trying to think of a good example to relate to, but, just for example, on the Loves Raymond writer's room, Phil Rosenthal was incredibly good at letting everybody contribute because he was so secure. So he wouldn't go like, I should have thought of that joke. You want everybody to be like,
it was like Jim Henson from what I've read.
Yeah.
Too.
I think so. You to not collaborate, to be such an egomaniac that there's nobody like, again, you look at the Beatles, it's like, there's competition, but every song got better because John and George and Ringo and Paul were working together, and I think everything, and that's, if you don't have that collaborative spirit, I think, you could do it as a painter, I guess, where you're just, there's no collaboration within reason, you know what I mean? But somebody still has to design the paints and stuff, you know what I mean? Like, you can't be just, I guess, a writer would be the purest.
And I loved seeing as it developed how you guys would all kind of roast each other.
On
especially when you're warming up to film a puppet video.
Live, when we're filming the show.
And then even live, it just gets silly, like some fun, not insults, but some fun of the puppets making fun of each other.
Can I tell you what's interesting, just for going back to psychology?
Yeah.
Men and women are so different.
Right.
Men, I could walk in and go, Malcolm, you got to stop taking these ugly pills, man. They took already, be like, you'd be laughing and whatever.
Right.
If it was 2 women saying that, the friendship's over. It's like,
although I got to say, Nee is pretty good keeping up.
Anybody who's a professional in the comedy world is that, yes, there are funny women, but I'm just saying in general, the default. So that with Victor, because the good thing is, there's one of the reasons we were able to make a show is because a guy named Barry Tatelman put in money, right? And he wanted to be like Jim Henson. And so the going back to the thing of, you still have to make a living. So the only reason we're able to make this is because he's like, look, I want to do this. Let's try and do it, and he was able to put in the money to at least make this low budget thing that looks great, thanks to having the expertise of Victor, who's like, Victor, we have no money, but we still got to make it. How do we make it?
Right.
And with the combination of Zach and Nee writing it and
some
producing.
of that's the charm. I mean, when I watch the new show now,
yes,
and how it doesn't look like this pristine, perfect everything. There's like a lot of little corners and bent things, and it just makes it fun. It almost makes me think that like Mr. Clown made the set.
Yeah. Well, that was
a kid helped him draw.
Well, what's interesting is, I worked with the Pink Fong Baby Shark people, right? And so before they released Baby Shark, so we built their puppet. Russ Walco built their puppet, Pink Fong puppet. And one of the things they said, they had a backdrop and we had to make it. We were going to shoot it. We shot it, all this stuff. And I send it to my friends who are 1030 Studios. They're incredible graphic artists, like the movie poster for Coco, like big players. And so they made their backdrop look amazing. And so I said to the Bin, who's the CEO of Pink Fong USA, I said, hey, they made it better. And she's like, oh, well, we try and make everything look like a kid could cut it out of paper. Yeah. Even though it was color. So for Mr. Clown, we're like, okay, everything is made from cardboard. Yeah. Everything is made from cardboard. I love it. And so the house, the set, everything should be something that Mr. Clown made and in his imagination. Because the whole idea, the premise of the show is Mr. Clown has a whole talk show and it's all taking place in his head.
And I don't want to do any plot spoilers, but one of my favorite parts of the show is when they go under the desk. Yeah. And it's like the secret
Super room? Secret space.
Super. When they go down there, it makes me think of like growing up in the 70s and 80s with my brothers and sisters, like, putting a blanket over a table and having a light. And a flashlight. And I think a lot of people can identify with that. Just like, we're having fun, we're playing.
Well, that I wanted to do, just think as a 5-year-old. 5-year-old has such a vivid imagination. Everything goes and you're so not tied. And so I'm like, oh, that's the kids instantly. I knew it. I knew it because kids would instantly be like, okay, we're under this space and nobody can hear us, with the flashlight.
And that it doesn't make sense that it's like bigger down there than the desk, kind of like Oscar the Grouch's, you go into his can and it's this whole huge.
Well, we still haven't done it, but we want to do Milton. We had it initially Milton the dog as a he's on the set and he has a doghouse, and anytime we go to the doghouse, it's endless experience of everything. We just haven't had the chance to do that.
And like you were saying with Barry, he still does he voice one of the characters?
He voices Ozzy, the
drummer,
and he can play drums.
He's great
in real life.
He's got a great voice.
Yeah,
I didn't know that he was a drummer.
Oh yeah, he's a drummer. Yeah, he loves what is Billy Joel's drummer forever? Liberty DeVito. Yeah. He loves Liberty DeVito. So he sat in Liberty DeVito's band. He had to play. But yeah, I think the goal is to just make children's content that parents can watch. And there's some children's content like Miss Rachel, which is phenomenally good at helping kids learn to speak. You know what I mean? But it's a different animal than what we're doing. We're doing entertaining stuff that an adult isn't going to go, do I have to watch this? You know what I mean? Like,
I found that, I was lucky enough to be on the set with you guys a couple of times, and watching it, I'm just laughing out loud. So I think anybody, no matter how old they are, will like to watch this.
Yeah, we'll find out. Malcolm, as you know, it's like your desire to make something means nothing. You know what I mean? Like you have to have the desire, but there's just
determination, tenacity, everything. You just can't give up. I mean, you got to be thick-skinned.
Oh, you got to be really thick-skinned.
I mean, how many things did you just tell me that you went through that didn't work?
Can I tell you, just because I'm not a big player per se, but Ray took forever to get his show. Ray came off of a #1 hit show with a high Q rating, as they say. Like a Q rating is how the audience responds to you. Like Oprah has a crazy high Q rating. Where it's just like you have goodwill. And Ray couldn't get his show back on the air, and you would think a network would go, you know what? You're coming off a giant hit show. And actually, if you look it up, Jerry Seinfeld does somebody cut this together. Seinfeld ends, and he goes, you know what I want to do? I want to pitch a show where I'm talking to my famous comedian friends, and we're having coffee. And so someone goes, okay, you know what? Let's go to the agency. This guy knows this guy. This guy does everything. This guy does everything. And he goes to the agency. He goes, okay, here's what I want to do. He pitches the idea, and they go, well, we don't know what to do with that. I don't think that'll sell. And he's like, what? How big do you have to be? How much of a celebrity? And it gets picked up by like Cracked, like a thing. Sony Cracked.
One of my favorite shows. I love that show.
Of course. But
what is it? Comedians in Cars.
Cars Getting Coffee. But I'm just like, no, here's a guy you would think everybody would be like, yes, Jerry. And so on the outside, when you're not in Hollywood, you're like, oh, well, of course, anything Brad Pitt wants to do, anything, any big celebrity. Ray just goes, I want to make another show. Let's do it. Or Phil Rosenthal, who was the most successful show, just an incredibly talented showrunner, can make it.
You just can't predict, right? You can't predict what's going to happen.
To get a yes is so hard. It's unbelievably hard. You know what I mean? It's just because
so you get a yes and then hope that it takes off, right?
Well, and that's why I think YouTube is so great.
Yes.
Right? You're like, the audience goes, you know what? I like this. And that's why you see this crazy obscure stuff. And you're like, this has 4 million views. And what is it?
Yeah.
It's a guy playing bongos with a spoon. You know, it's like.
Yeah, I was just listening to Conan O'Brien's podcast and they had Ben Stiller on and they asked him how Severance started, which is an incredible show.
Yeah.
And he said that somehow some guy got his script to Ben's people and they're like, please, will you just read this? I mean, what are the chances with all the scripts they get all the time?
Oh, yeah,
and then
of
it
course.
turned into this phenomenal success.
Yeah. It's unbelievable.
You must continually see people that are so talented that they deserve success and it just hasn't happened yet, right? How often do you see that?
Well, can I tell you, one of the things, even that, off of that is you don't know. In other words, if Larry David died after SNL, he worked on SNL. I think he got one sketch. He quit, right? And he was a terrible stand-up and he got fired from SNL. And if he died then, people go, do you guys remember a guy named Larry David? Oh, yeah, he was terrible, right? Yeah, he just wasn't good. Yeah. I mean, he sucked. And now the second half of his life, he's this genius, right? Yeah. So that story in itself, that this guy is now, probably the richest show business, showrunner in history.
2 huge shows.
Yes, but
2. I mean, what are the chances of that?
Yes, well, when you're really brilliant, but if he had quit it, how old was he at SNL? I don't know, 30. Was he 35 or you know what I mean? Right? Because he would have gone to his grave, and people would be like, that guy just didn't have it. Whatever it took to make money in show business, he didn't have it. And so there's you also don't know what niche you're going to fit into. But off of what you're saying, one of the things, and we talked about Rick Marotta. Rick Marotta is a session drummer, a monster drummer, and he did the music for Loves Raymond. And the first time when I was going to do a show, I go to Rick. I go, Rick, he's also a very cool dude who was at the height of rock and roll.
Right.
You know what I mean? So this is not a guy who's Mr. Rogers who's like, you want to see my puppet? So I go to his studio with Mr. Clown and I go, Rick, I think he can play the drums. I think we have Mr. Clown play the drums. So I somewhere have a video.
Yeah. I have seen that. Yeah. Of
him playing the drums. And of all the people that's championed it, it's the unlikely hero is Rick.
Yeah.
Rick brought in Barry because I was trying to help. He said, advise this guy in a sitcom. That's how I got introduced to Barry. But Rick has been a phenomenal supporter and recognizes it. And even you're talking about doing a video for Steve Gadd. We did a video for Courtney Cox's birthday, right? Rick Marotta has known Courtney Cox since she was like 18 or something. Right. He was at the Friends pilot. He's like, oh, I think it'll go. So they had to do a video for Courtney Cox. So I said, we did a video. It was Milton, Victor, and myself ad-libbing around the board, around Rick's mixing
He's
board.
A funny guy.
And Rick goes, hey, I wish I was there, but I'm working in kind of this super group, and then we come into frame like, oh, how's it going, Rick? What do you do? What is that red button for? He goes, I don't like to talk about it, but it's going to be big. It's going to, and it was a very funny, and Rick is Rick acted a lot. Rick was in Miami Vice and a whole bunch of stuff.
I think the first time I saw him in person was at a NAMM show, maybe 15 years ago. And he was hosting all the drummers. I think you were there.
Cerritos? Were you at Cerritos?
Yeah. And it was like a comedy act. I mean, he's that funny.
Yeah. Well, good timing. And so that's the Yamaha. He's sponsored by Yamaha. And what Malcolm is talking about is a giant show. And I remember because Scott Bakula was there, who ends up playing a character based on me later. I didn't know, but he was there because he's married to Rick's ex-wife.
Wow.
But
that's a different podcast.
Yeah. It's a giant, all these legendary drummers. If you're a drummer, this is like heaven. This would be like every great guitar player. I was losing my
mind.
Yeah. And so
Steve Jordan, Steve Gadd, Prince's drummer. It was crazy.
Yes. Crazy amount of drummers playing the hit that they did and then other songs. So one of the hits they're known for, and it was just all in one room, the greatest drummers ever. And Rick, because he's so funny and so good, he would MC these around the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He did them in Germany and whatever,
And he often did them with his brother Jerry, too. Rick.
Jerry,
did the double drums.
Yeah, exactly. Jerry Marotta, who played with Peter Gabriel and a bunch of other people.
Another great guy.
Yeah, but Rick, I'm just saying, Rick has championed this. And
he and Barry New are the producers, right?
Yes, executive producers.
Yeah.
But I mean, look, it's just a handful of us making the whole show, and it's, really, Nee and Zach and I wrote it, right? And then they really have done an amazing job producing it. And then I had an editor who, and this, I think, by the way, we're way, this is a really important thing. Just making introductions to people.
Yes.
The editor, one of the editors that's working with us is a guy that my old roommate in where I worked on the pilot for Raymond with Ray. Phil wrote the brilliant pilot, and then we did something called Rayifying it, right? We would put it into Ray's words. And so one of my roommates from there, Brian McFadden, he calls me out of the blue in like 2010. He goes, "Hey, I have a young kid that graduated from NYU and he's moving out there. And that kid came here, worked with me on and off for a long time. And then out of the blue, he calls me while we're shooting the Hello, Hi, How Are You, Mr. Clown show."
Yeah.
And he's like, "Hey, do you have any work at all?" And I go, "Geez," we're just in the middle of shooting 10 episodes for PBS. Why don't you come by? And he lives like a mile from the studio. So he comes by and he's an amazing editor.
Yeah.
So while we were filming, he was starting to assemble.
Wow.
Because otherwise we would never have made this
The
incredible
editing is
deadline.
great on there.
Yeah, the editor, well, it's Zach, Nee, and Will together. But and then now Will's editing all of the Dropout stuff, that studio that we're in, that they're, that they were nice.
You've got
enough
Brock
to use.
too, right? One of my favorite people.
Brock, yes. Brock Morse, puppeteer, uncomfortably good-looking, tall puppeteer. I'll tell you a funny story. We were going to see Mr. Clown's house, which physically lives in Altadena,
right?
Okay, which burned down. It didn't burn down. Mr. Clown's house didn't burn down because we took it out of there. No, his house didn't burn down, but he had to evacuate. Brock had to evacuate. Yeah. But the first time we're going there to do it, before we're doing the shoot for the opening, we're there with our friend who's also in the show. He plays the director, Shane Salk. And so we're all driving together. Me, Jen, who's working with us, and Shane. And we're driving to Brock's house. We meet Brock, see the house, and we're leaving. And Shane goes, "That guy's a little too good looking to be a puppeteer, isn't he?" And I'm like, "Is that a dig at me? Is that
wow?
And he goes, "No, but he's so," because Brock is like, for those of you who don't know, Brock, he's 6'7", strikingly handsome, right? Constantly casting commercials.
And I just saw the movie he did with Morgan Freeman too.
Oh yeah, that was a George Gallo production. George Gallo is my neighbor. So anyway, but yes, Brock is in there. Brock plays the character Brock,
the broccoli.
The broccoli. He also plays Red, who is an orange.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about Red.
So we and hopefully we'll lose more.
But anyway, does he do the sunshine?
And he does Sunny. The sun, which he does a lot. So by the way, just getting to know people. That's what I'm saying. That guy. Then Ray did a movie called Paddleton. Yes. And I became friends with everybody, including the director, Alex Lehman. That's a phenomenal movie. Not Paddington, Paddleton.
Oh,
okay.
Oh, no, I've seen it twice. I love it.
Yeah, no, I'm saying for your listeners.
Yeah. Paddleton. It was originally on Netflix, right?
Yes, it was on Netflix. The Duplass brothers. Ray and Mark Duplass. But I became friends with the DP there, and he goes, "I want to work with you on something, Tom." So I said, "Oh, I'm doing only Mr. Clown stuff." I go, "Direct a music video," and he goes, "I don't know how," but I said, "You don't have to."
Which one did he do?
Inside, Outside.
Oh my God, that one's incredible.
Yeah. So it was Victor. I'm like, we're all there. We see the shots. So for those of you that don't know, when you're puppeteering, it's the only art that you can watch yourself performing because you're watching yourself in a monitor.
Yes.
When you're playing drums or playing guitar or playing, you can't you take yourself out if you start watching yourself playing. So
by the way, it's not easy. You've let me do a few tiny, very simple things. Yeah.
Well, you're looking backwards in a monitor. Yeah. And that's where. When I met Victor, he's like, "Okay, here's how you're going to become a professional, Tom." Because I had the personality.
Yeah.
And when they teach you at Henson, one of the things they say is get a life, meaning give the puppet a backstory or a personality.
Right.
Your technical skill isn't as important as giving it a personality. Mr. Clown had a personality, but I had zero skill doing into a camera in a monitor because
but you had the acting chops and the comedy chops, which I think are
they're
more
very important. Yeah. Ultimately, if you can learn, But Victor was at a level that I could only aspire to even now. I mean, this is 10 years ago. But just getting back to getting to know people, that Alex Lehman directed that pilot, that music video. I became friends with the sound guy on the Paddleton movie, which we highly recommend. That guy helped when I was doing the pilot for the first show of Hello, Hi, How Are You? Then he couldn't do it. He said, "Listen, I have another sound guy, but I have a DP that would be really good." That guy, Matt Minland is his name. He had shot some stuff for Henson, but he came in and he elevated our game completely. He became the DP on our TV show, but it was all just friendships.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
collaborations.
And collaborate, but getting to know, this guy came out of the blue.
Right.
Matt Midland came out of the blue and elevated our game completely. And then he brought a guy, Omar, who was our sound guy. But I'm just saying, I had an editor that I worked with 12 years ago who calls me out of the blue. I had, you know what I mean? Like, it all fell into place. And then we got a free studio space with these YouTube guys that we were helping who rented space and didn't have a use for it yet. It took them like 6 months. So it all fell into place, all from friendships. You know,
I think you have a passion for a lot of things that you like, but also for people. You just like people, and that goes a long way.
I will say this: we didn't even get to this part, but that can be part 7. I guest hosted the Late Late Show after Letterman.
Yeah.
So years after that acting class where I said I want to be Johnny Carson, I had this weird experience where when I moved out to work on Raymond in 1996, Greg Kinnear left and they were getting guest hosts. So I called my agents who barely knew me. They said, hey, can I get, I go, I know this sounds weird. I'm not just reading it. I really have always wanted to do this. And they said, well, we'll see if we can get you a shot. But you're an unknown on a show that nobody knows. They go, we can't get you a shot. I go, okay. 9 years later, Craig Kilborn walks off. Now it's 9 years later. And Letterman's company produces, so I get a shot. And it goes incredibly well. Okay. I mean, for me, I was like, we went so well. It just went well. I mean, I'm just not even. And the next day, Phil and another writer came into my office. They go, you have to get it. Like, you're just so natural and so good. And I didn't get it. Craig Ferguson got it. And I later heard the reasons, which we'll get into on another time. But I didn't get it. When I didn't get it, I get a call from a guy that wrote for one episode of Raymond. He calls me. He goes, Tom, Tony DeSena is his name, and he worked for Letterman, Carson, a lot of stuff. He goes, it was great. And at this point, I knew I didn't have it. So I didn't even need to, that was bad news. I was like, oh, thanks, but I didn't get it. He goes, you did everything. You know, you did a great monologue. You went into the audience and ad-libbed, which is really risky, and you pulled it off. And he goes, but the most important thing is you listened to your guests. And he goes, where were you 9 years ago when I was the head writer of the Greg Kinnear show looking for a host? And I go, Tony, those are the worst things I could ever hear. He goes, why? I go, I begged my agents to get me a shot. He goes, I kept getting these one managers, comedians, and I kept saying to them, learn to listen to the people. You're funny. That's why you're here. Don't be funny. Listen to people. And I said, it was so heartbreaking. I go, Tony, I tried. He goes, oh my God. He goes, and then we became friends. He's like, I'm going to try and get you back, try and get you onto late night. And that's why we did the bar social dating thing. That's why. And now it's ironic that I'm doing a talk show with a clown puppet. Yeah,
you did get your dream, but you're just doing it as a
different
puppet.
Form. Yes, in a different form.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Tom, there's so many things. I didn't even get through
a lot of
10% of what I want to ask you.
Oh, really?
So if you would agree to come back, that would be great. And what would you like to promote?
Everett Brothers Raymond 360 is any fans of Everett Raymond, that's a website, Instagram, Facebook, the whole.
So the Instagram, the one that I watch is every Sunday at 2 Pacific time, right?
Oh, the live one. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it goes up. Yeah, that goes up. But what I share is my 30,000 photos. And by the way, we're speaking now after the big California fires.
Right.
We almost had to evacuate, and we were right on the edge of evacuation. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to digitize all these photos.
Yes.
So one of the ways of sharing it is doing them. But then,
there's that, and I also heard you mention on the Instagram today that there's a website where they can get the merch, like the cool mugs and all.
Oh yeah.
And this,
what Malcolm is holding up is a fork and spoon. That's a big episode called the Baggage episode, the only episode that won the Emmy for writing. I did not write it. Tucker Cawley wrote it, but it was pivotal, the big fork and spoon. If you know, there's a very famous line from that show, which is don't let a suitcase full of cheese be your big fork and spoon. But yeah.
All right, so everybody loves Raymond 360.
Yeah, ELR360shop.com. And then my Tom Caltabiano photo, which is just my photo site. Yes. And then, MC and
I'm
Friends,
sorry, that's Instagram or a website also?
That's a website also.
Okay.
Just put in my name and something will pop up. Hopefully not the police record. Kidding about the police record. Okay, so that.
And then for Mr. Clown, hello, hi, how are you?
That's on PBS. If you look up pbs.org, the app. You'll look up "Hello, Hi, How Are You?" and you'll find it.
You can download the app, and then there's the Mr. Clown website, right?
Then we have Mr. Clown website. Yeah, there's a lot of things.
Yeah.
And then also the name of our group. You'll see it on the PBS thing. "Hello, Hi, How Are You?" is the show. Bop Stars is now the name of our global thing. So
they can search any of these. Mr. Clown, Hello, Hi, How Are You?
Yeah,
Bop Stars.
Bop Stars. But yeah, the PBS, we're very proud. We're very proud of the show. And by the way, Malcolm, you got us our band. We have a kids band.
My students.
Your students are a kids band. Yeah.
Yeah, Sydney, Bella, and Wes. They're all incredible musicians.
Oh, yeah. And they're great. And they're great in the show. And you know, you'll see.
And we also want to thank Joe Testa for sending us drums and cymbals, right?
Oh, yeah. Drums and cymbals. That's right.
Sticks. Yeah. A lot of cool stuff.
Yeah. Joe Testa. I totally forgot. Malcolm, I'd love. By the way, we've touched on 1/10 of the stories, and we've already bored people for 3 hours. I think. Yeah. Can I come back again?
I would love that. I think if you come back, maybe 11 more times, we'll cover everything that I had in plan.
Oh, you still have questions to answer? On this paper. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, we'll do it. We'll clean this up in post.
Yeah.
Edit it down to 12 minutes or something, and then we'll see you.
And we'll have bread next time.
Oh yeah, I'll make some bread. All right. Thanks.
All right. Malcolm. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.